Good morning and welcome to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Today we're going to do a little experiment on stitch length. So join us and let's see what stitch lengths really mean. Well, good morning and welcome back. I've been wondering for the longest time what stitch lengths really mean. Now, of course, I know that the lower the number, the shorter the stitch, but really, what does that translate into? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to sew 5 lengths on my sewing machine on this piece of dark green fabric and different stitch lengths, and then we're going to look at what those stitch lengths look like and do a little bit of measuring and see if we can figure out what we're really talking about. We all know that there is a use for each type of stitch length. For example, when I'm working on foundation paper piecing and I'm stitching the pieces together, I use like a 1.8 on my machine, and that's getting down. You know, that's a good question. Does it get any lower than that? Let's see. Now for me, it will go down to 1.0. But for the purposes of our test today, I think I'm going to start at 1.8 because really for me, if it gets any smaller than that, I'm not going to be able to take it out. So we're going to start at 1.8. We're going to do a strip of stitches at 1.8, and that's marked by the red pen. A row of stitches at 2.4, which is usually what I use for most stitching, and that's the white pen. Then we're going to do a row at 3, that's the blue pen, and then a row at 4, the pink pen, and a row at 5, the gold pen. Now let me tell you when I would use the 5. When I'm doing that foundation paper piecing, the basting I'm putting around the outside between the stitch line and the edge of the fabric, that's a 5. I'm doing that just to hold it in place with no intention that the stitch is actually going to have a purpose in the finished document, in the finished product. The other time I would probably use a 5 is if I were gathering material in a non-quilting type of sewing. So let's get started with this. I'm just going to set my machine at 1.8 and we're going to get started. I've got some white thread in here and I hope that's going to help show it a little bit better, and I'm going to try as well as I can to stitch straight lines. We'll see how that goes. So here's the 1.8. That's probably enough for us to see. Okay, and now we're going to stitch the 2.4, and that's just going to be a little bit bigger, not too very much bigger. And now we're going in with the 3.0. Paper's walking away from me. And then our 4.0. I do a lot of stitches sometimes on that 3.5 as well. Maybe if I'm basting around a finished quilt. Oops. Got caught up a little bit there on the pen, I think. And then I'm going to move our gold pen a little closer. And then our gold here on the 5. now we've got these out, and we're going to take a look at them. And I'm going to pull my light a little bit closer so we can see a little bit better. Okay, and grab something to point with, which I always end up with this little screwdriver for some reason. Okay, so here we go. Let's make sure we can see what we're doing here. The one thing I noticed right off the bat is the bigger the stitches get, the more it wants to self-gather. A little bit of pucker in there. So my stitches, as far as the way they look, are fine. It could be that the top tension is just a little bit tight. Okay, so let's look at the 1/8 over here. It's really tiny. There's just enough definition to show that there is an individual stitch there, but they are really, really small. Let me see if I can bring us in a little closer. Yeah, we can. That's great. Okay, I think I've got that adjusted where it's a little bit closer now, and I'm going to we'll do this. Okay, so let's go back. The 1.8 here has got tiny, tiny little stitches. You just can't see the definition on the top. And when we turn it over on the bottom, I see a little better definition here on the bottom. Tiny, tiny stitches. Now, if we needed to, they are big enough that we could get the point of a seam ripper in that stitch. So we would be able to rip that stitch out if we needed to, but it's going to be pretty difficult. Then move into the 2.4. You can see that this is a really small stitch. Still, we've got a little definition there showing us where the stitches are on the front. On the back, it's much better. Definitely no problem ripping that out if we needed to. But it's going to be a nice stitch that's going to really hold things together well. Then moving on to the 3. I look at 3, and what I see is the typical stitch, standard stitch I would have seen on what I call an old-fashioned machine, not an electronic machine, just a manual machine. Something like what I might get on my antique red eye, Singer red eye. Is just a basic stitch. Definition a little bit between the stitches. Again, that tension on the top might be a little bit snug. On the back, we've got a nice, nice defined line there. Very nice. Then over to the 4, and we've got a wider stitch there. Would be something really good for jeans or a heavyweight material. A bigger stitch, a little bit of gathering here. Flip it over to the back side. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's this one here. Lovely stitch. And then 5. This would be the one that we gather with, and you can see just how long that stitch is. Flip it over on the back. Lots of definition there. But there is a little bit of puckering. Now let's look at lengths. Let's start here where it's the easiest. And in 1 inch on this number 5, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. Now, why it couldn't be 5 on number 5, I don't know, but it's not. Let's move over to 4 and see if we can do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, almost 8 stitches in 1 inch. And then on the number 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9.5 stitches. On the 2.4, this is going to get even harder to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Looks like almost 12 stitches. And I'm not going to count the 1.8. That just seems silly because we know that there are a lot of stitches. So a little representation there of the different kind of settings for stitch length and then what the stitches actually look like. And I'm going to flip this over so you can see the back side of it. This is the 5, the 4, 3, 2.4, and 1.8. So you can see just the difference in those stitches. Look at the wide disparity between the 1.8 and the 5. And that's why we use that for that basting stitch. And also you can see the gathering. That's why we use it for the gathering. Now, if you press this, it's going to flatten out a bit, but it's still going to have a little bit of a pucker. And that's one of the things you need to watch. Not so much on quilting, although if you're stitching long lengths of something, you might want to be mindful of that, is if you do have any, you might need to adjust your tension on your top thread. Now, my machine is supposed to have an automatic tension. And I find that probably 90% of the time it works great. I have no issue with it, but occasionally I'll find, like today, where we have that little bit of an issue where it's a problem. But let me tell you this, we're also sewing on a single piece of fabric, and that could have an impact on how these stitches look too if we were sewing on 2 layers, which you normally would. Or even more layers, you would have more depth and height on the fabric. So you're going to have a little bit of difference. So that extra tension on the top may actually help you when you have more fabric. I think that we've demonstrated accurately the differences in these stitches. And I'm going to leave this here one more time just so you can see those stitches and what they are. There, I think that's even better, right? Just like that. I hope you enjoyed this little experiment. It's just a little refresher, as we would say, on what those stitches actually look like. I think sometimes we just get it in our head. We always sew on this. We always sew on that. Well, what happens if you have to use a different machine, if you need to really think about what kind of stitch you want to put in something? With quilting, a lot of times if we're machine piecing, we're just sewing, 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 sewing. And then if we have to stop and move to another type of project, we really need to think about what we're doing and understand how our machine might compare to another and be able to adjust appropriately. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you found this helpful at all, please give me a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. That helps us with our algorithm. And we'll see you next week here at the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Bye.